It's been 5 years since it was successfully kickstarted, but episodes 3 and 4 are finally out, and Starquail Studios' Tiny Barbarian DX is complete. Tiny Barbarian plays like a beat-em-up, except with a sword, so it's a sword-em-up, and you will spend the majority of your time jumping and sorting. The controls are pretty simple. You have the directional pad for moving and changing direction, and then one button for jumping and another for sorting. But simple controls don't mean that the combat is entirely basic. You can string combos together with your sword, or even pull off a wrestling elbow attack. Plus, the little barbarian can also flex and use that to reflect attacks if he times it right. Anyways, like I was saying, the controls are simple, but they're also intuitive, at least generally speaking. You see, there's a mechanic where you need to hold up so you can grab onto a ledge or vine, and this usually works just fine. But there are plenty of times it doesn't work, where you're off by a pixel and you fall down to your doom. But other than that, the game controls fine. Now, the game is composed of 4 different episodes, and each of them has their own simple plot that gets conveyed through gameplay and a short cutscene at the beginning of the episode. Each episode is comprised of multiple levels, and each level has multiple sections. To keep from being repetitive, the game packs in a lot of variety, so even though you might always be doing some jumping and sorting, the nature will always be different. You'll find yourself riding a bee, traversing a rotating tower, or even fighting off a boss that throws bombs at you. There's always a new spin on the basic formula. Even the boss fights mix it up from fight to fight as they find new ways to beat you into the ground. Did I mention that this game was hard? Because difficulty is the only constant in the gameplay, and you will constantly have your ability to react and recognize patterns challenged. You only lose 1 health point when you get hit, but you also only have 6 health points overall to lose. But don't let that scare you away. Thanks to some quality of life improvements over its retro influences, Tiny Barbarian's difficulty is far more manageable. For starters, you have unlimited lives, so you can die as many times as your pride will allow. Plus, every time you beat a section of a level and move on to the next, the game will create a checkpoint. So dying only forces you to replay the section you died in instead of the entire level. Furthermore, if you ever find yourself stuck, or you just need a break, you can shut off the game and then continue later from wherever you leave off. These improvements go a long way in mitigating the crushing difficulty and make it more friendly to newcomers. Plus, there isn't even a tutorial to get stuck on, so even a game journalist can beat it. If you're a fan of Sword and Sorcery novels and retro games, then Tiny Barbarian should be right up your alley, especially if you check out its influences. Thematically, the game draws a lot of inspiration from the Sword and Sorcery fiction, like Conan the Barbarian, but especially Fought-Herd and the Grey Mouser. It was also thematically inspired by games like Roston, Karnov, and Rygar. Game-wise though, Tiny Barbarian DX is largely inspired by Shinobi 3 for the Sega Genesis. Michael Stearns, the lead game and art designer for Tiny Barbarian, really liked the close-up attack from Shinobi 3, and he wanted to use it in a game instead of a ranged attack. Plus, he was also inspired by how Shinobi 3 kept the game feeling diverse, something that Tiny Barbarian does really well. In fact, there's a section in Tiny Barbarian where you're riding an elevator that's an homage to a similar level in Shinobi 3, except the baddies have blow darts instead of guns. There are definitely other games that inspired Tiny Barbarian besides Shinobi 3 though, like the thief you can find throughout the game reminds me of the gnomes and golden axe you can pummel for goodies. And then there's a chicken you find on the wall to heal yourself with, which reminds me of the wall pork chops from Castlevania. This part also reminded me of Castlevania. Moving past the influences though, let's discuss the presentation of the game. Visually, the game might appear simple at first glance, especially if you look at the pixel art of your character. However, once the game is in motion, you'll really start to appreciate how much detail they put in. The animation of the characters are full of little details, like the way the snake slithers around on the ground, or how the fire spitter shakes his belly when he attacks you. There's also just the beautiful backgrounds in their multiple layers. You don't often have a lot of downtime to just sit back and appreciate the backgrounds, but they look great nonetheless. It does a great job of recreating the look of old games. Not the way that they actually looked, but how we remember them with our rose-tinted nostalgia glasses. Then there's a soundtrack composed by Jeff Ball, which is just fantastic. It's so good that I constantly found myself nodding along, even during levels where I got my ass handed to me for the better part of an hour. The mix of MIDI percussion and chiptune is just great, and I would recommend getting the soundtrack whether or not the game interests you. Having sung the game's praises, I do have some criticisms for it that detract from the experience. I mentioned the problems that occasionally arise when trying to grab onto a ledge or a rope. Well, that problem is magnified by the many vertical platforming sections in the game. You see, vertical movement isn't the game's strong suit, and when you're trying to grab onto a ledge, you're also going to be faced with the problem that you can't really attack upwards unless you're standing, and the game's going to throw plenty of obstacles in your face while you're trying to focus on not misjudging a ledge, which is going to cause you to fall down a lot. But the biggest drawback for me is that the game's difficulty can be uneven and will spike in certain sections. You see, the game goes from challenging, but fun, all the way to frustrating, where beating the challenge didn't feel like an accomplishment so much as tedious work that you should have completed like 20 minutes ago. The most frustrating parts of the game for me were lengthy vertical challenges, where failure meant you were either thrown into a bottomless pit and died, or you dropped back to the start and had to try again anyways. Like on this rotating tower section, I would need to constantly repeat the first 60 seconds of the stage just to get to the part that keeps eating all my HP, where it wasn't so much frustrating because it was difficult, but because it was so long and tedious for me to have to retry the section over and over if I made the smallest mistake. Then there's the bosses, where even though they all have patterns for you to learn and counter, there's still an element of randomness that will get you, like the Spike Gimp monster that throws a spike ball at you. You're supposed to wail on him after he throws a spike ball, but sometimes he'll be knocked against the wall and flop over you, while other times he'll just get knocked to the side. And when I overlay the video, he's ostensibly standing at the same spot, but he does something different each time. And unfortunately I have to be able to react to that, because shortly thereafter he generally does this knife throwing business that I have to react to as well. Worrying about this random element adds to the list of things you already need to keep track of during a boss fight, like random projectiles, moving platforms, random enemies, and the struggle to figure out what attack the boss is going to use next. And the worst offender of all the bosses is the final one, who I'm not going to show, but he's got a whole host of issues that make him really annoying to fight. Like, he isn't difficult, he's just tedious and frustrating. Even the generous checkpoint system wasn't enough to make the final boss agreeable. That being said, the frustrating moments are few and far between, and they only crop up occasionally during each episode, but they are there, and they are going to eat into your playtime and your patience. The game is entirely beatable though. I mean, I was able to do it and I suck. There are also some other drawbacks to the game, but they don't really have anything to do with the game itself, they're more about external factors. Like, when I purchased the game, it was $10 and only 2 of the episodes were released. However, with the release of episode 3 and 4, the game's price has gone up to $30. Now this probably has to do with the physical release the game got for the Nintendo Switch, but if you're just getting a digital copy, $30 seems like a tad much. I say that $20 would have been a better price, especially when you look at some of its competitors. Another drawback is that the developers weren't really great at communicating about their game. You see, after episode 2 released in June of 2014, there was only sparse news about the game, whether you looked at their Kickstarter, social media, or even Steam updates. Then in May of 2016, there was an announcement that they were partnering with Nicalis and episode 3 was coming soon. But then nothing. It took until June 2017 to learn that there was going to be a Switch version of the game, and then it took until September to find out what the release date for the game was. I mainly bring this up as a problem because I barely found out that the game had come out, and I'm someone who's paying close attention. I want to support small teams like Starquail, but it's kind of difficult when I have trouble finding out when their game is actually released. Because despite some frustrating sections, the game is really fun and I do recommend getting it. It's worth your time. Like, the 4 episodes will run you anywhere from 5 to 10 hours, depending on skill or lack thereof. Like me! There's even a small bonus episode you can unlock. Plus, if you want to, you can play the game in co-op, which I would suspect would make some sections easier, but others a lot harder. And if you really want to challenge yourself, there's always a leaderboards where you can compare your best times and scores with other players. Or you can try getting the achievements for the different episodes where you either beat it without dying, or find all the secret diamonds. There's even an extra little mini mode where you can practice the game's combat system against a horde of enemies and test how long you can survive. Now if you're still on the fence, you can go check out the original tech demo for this game, which was made back in 2010 and is available for free. But I want to stress that it's a tech demo, and that it doesn't fully represent the final product. Now go out and experience all those barbarian fantasies you never even knew you had. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching the video, and I recommend checking out some of my other recommendations as well. Happy Halloween!